And Tim Beek, president of St. Mary Development Corporation, is now our featured speaker.
Great. Thank you, Donna. And thanks to Ryan. That was great information. It dovetails so well with what I want to share today, especially about some of these things about local decision making, supply side, kind of economics with housing. I am the president of St. Mary Development Corporation. We're a 34-year-old faith-based nonprofit headquartered in Dayton. And we've developed about 5,000 units of affordable housing, mostly in Southwest Ohio, but actually in 9 different states. And we've done more than $500 million in housing development. Just in Dayton, we house more than 1,000 older people. And we've, in addition to that, to creating the housing, we also provide service coordination. So we connect our residents to the services they need to remain independent as long as possible as they age. And our primary goal is really about what Ryan had mentioned, social determinants of health. It's removing these negative social determinants of health so that we can improve the quality of life of the people that live in our buildings. And as Donna mentioned, we'll share my slides because some of the charts I'm not going to spend a lot of time on. You may want to dive into them a little bit more deeply later on. And while a lot of the examples I give are for Dayton and Ohio, I know there's people from other places. The concepts I share are the same almost everywhere. We've done housing in 9 states. We see these things. So it doesn't matter whether you're on the coasts or in the Midwest, you'll see some of these same concepts. So in many ways, good housing doesn't vary by age. We all want the ability to live in our housing for the long term, if that's what we desire, assuming that our needs don't change. And we want to be close to amenities that we value, including family and friends. And perhaps most important, we want our housing to be affordable so we can pay for other things that we need, including healthcare, food, transportation. And so from that standpoint, whether we're young or old, our need for housing is kind of the same. We want to be part of a community and a place, as Ryan had said. But for older people, affordability is one of the most important factors. We're blessed in this country to have long life expectancy. America's population of people 90 and older has almost tripled since 1980. In 2010, it was 1.9 million people. It'll be over the next 40 years, we'll see that go up to more than 7.5 million people. But here's the thing, having the financial resources to live 20 to 30 years after retirement is very difficult. So in the United States, the median retirement income for people 55 to 64 is only about $90,000. So $90,000 is not a lot of money if you live into your 90s. To live 20 or 30 years on $90,000, even with Social Security, is pretty difficult. So when it comes to this affordability, as you look at an age-friendly community, what factors do you actually control as a community? What factors do you control so that you can make your town or city more age-friendly? Well, you don't have much control over construction costs or interest rates. Those are largely outside your control. You may have some control over population growth by making your community an attractive place to live and really becoming age-friendly. That's one of the reasons, is to make your community an attractive place to live. And I would say you influence that. You don't have total control over it, but you influence it quite a bit. But then there's government policy, especially local housing policy and zoning, and especially around the density of housing. That is something that is in local communities' control and is a key factor. It's the primary driver of affordability. It's especially important for people as they age, yet it's often not used effectively or used at all, really, in some communities. Often higher density housing, especially apartment buildings, are preferred by people as they get older. Apartment buildings are more likely to have better accessibility, zero-step entries, elevators, as well as on-site amenities, exercise rooms, meeting rooms, and places for kind of group meeting and space. So this census data that I'm sharing, it only goes through 2015, but it shows a 28% increase in renters who are older than 55. And in 2022, just more than 30% of people over 55 were renters. And we will see this increase as people age because the cost of owning and maintaining a home will be significantly more than renting in many cities. So my prediction is that no matter what community that you are in, you will see more older people opting to rent over time. Maybe not when they're 65 or 75, but at some point, renting is going to seem to become a much better option for them. What exactly is housing density, though? Really, housing density is simply the number of housing units within a geographic area. So the more units you have in a certain geographic area, the higher the density. In the example on the screen, you might have 100 new homes in a new subdivision. So you divide the geographic area by the 100 homes, and that's what your density is. Let's say your local zoning policy requires 100 feet of street frontage for each home. So that's 1.89 miles of street frontage for the 100 homes. But if the requirement was only 75 feet of street frontage, it would reduce the total by almost half a mile, by 0.47 miles. That extra 0.47 miles increases infrastructure costs by 25% per home compared to the 100 feet of street frontage. Another way of saying that is that instead of building 3 homes per 300 feet, you could build 4 homes. That's an additional 33 homes in 1.89 miles. Higher infrastructure costs increase the price of new homes, making them less affordable, but they also increase your city's ongoing operational expenses and costs for the community, driving up property taxes even more. Plus, if you have more homes in the same area, it means more real estate revenue, real estate tax revenue. So increased density is very good for cities economically. Often you don't think about the increased operational costs when adding homes to a community. For instance, in our 100 new home example, there's an extra half mile of road. So there's also an extra half mile that's extrapolated into other areas. So that's 172 miles per year in addition to drive the school bus to pick up kids. It's 284 additional miles for a mail truck. And it's an additional 5 miles of snow plowing, assuming 10 storms a year. But roads are a long-term investment. So over 30 years, that's more than 5,000 miles for the school bus, 8,500 miles for mail delivery, and 140 miles for snow plowing. That doesn't even include road repair costs. And this is only one development. And remember that if a city's population declines, the expenses of low density housing remain the same. So the city of Dayton has to maintain roads for a city of 240,000 people because that's what the population was at its peak, even though there's only 140,000 living there now. So some cities have population increases, others have decreases. The chart here shows some Dayton area communities. Miamisburg and Trotwood have slight decreases that they're looking at. When your population decreases, you still have to maintain those roads. And if you have empty houses like Dayton does, maintain those neighborhoods, which can be very expensive. Now, the extra half mile might not seem like it's a lot, but if you were planning a new city from scratch and your new city had 25,000 homes, you're talking about an extra 118 miles of road when you plan for low density. 118 miles, that's a little more than driving from Dayton to Cincinnati and back. That is a lot of extra roads. You don't really notice them because you're not driving straight 118 miles, but that's really what the bottom line is. And as Ryan had shared, in the United States, population growth is pretty flat. We're approaching 0% growth, and we've had population decline for the past few years. And in Ohio, we've had several years of population decline, as you can see from the red areas of this chart. So when you're thinking about housing, which is going to be around for 50 to 100 years or more, you need to think about the needs today, but you need to think about the need decades from now and what the impact will be decades from now. What seems like a great thing today may not be what's needed 40 years from now, but somebody will be dealing with the issues of that housing 40 years from now. A good example is Youngstown, Ohio. They had a significant population decline that actually required them to decommission many streets because they had so few people that lived on them. And the cost of maintaining those streets was too high. So when you have higher density, it helps to minimize this type of risk. What you're seeing, those red streets on the map, they decommission them. So not only did they pay to create them, then they pay to take them out of service. And the quote on the slide here is from a study about Youngstown. It's particularly instructive. The financial mismatch between rising maintenance costs and declining tax revenues could lead to massive infrastructure failure and municipal bankruptcies, with potentially tragic consequences for remaining residents and businesses. I would say in Dayton, for those of you who know Dayton, that's what we've seen. We've seen tragic consequences for residents and businesses based on population decline. And I would suggest for older people living in decommissioned neighborhoods, the impact is especially negative. So this is really important, not just for being age-friendly today, but really thinking about what does age-friendly mean for the next generation as well. Where land is expensive, building more homes per acre increases affordability. You can see from the example here, the same lot could fit one 3,000 square foot single family home, or 3 townhomes, or 6 condos. Now, obviously, the goal isn't to only have high-rise apartment buildings, which would have the highest density, but there are more gentle ways to increase density, such as townhomes, 2 to 4 family homes, small-scale apartments, and condos. But there is also a place for larger multifamily buildings, 50-plus unit apartment buildings. This is good development for everybody in a community, but especially for people as they age and for older people who often prefer not to own a house anymore. And they want to be within a community of people their age, and they want to be in something that's more affordable for them. In the example of the 100-unit single-family home development that I shared, in that same space, we could put in a 100-unit apartment community, along with 10 townhomes and 20 condos, as well as a public park. The denser option has no public roads to plow or maintain, a much shorter distance for the school bus and mail trucks to drive, plus it provides more green space to enjoy. And we should see these type of developments in every city in addition to single-family homes. It's not an either or, but even in rural communities, you should see some of this going on, but often we don't. Another way to increase the density and improve housing affordability is through accessory dwelling units, or ADUs. So these create a smaller independent dwelling located on the same site as a single family home. It could be a detached ADU, it could be attached to the house, it could be above a garage, in a basement, a converted garage or attic. But the key is your zoning has to allow this to happen. Some places forbid this, and you're not allowed to have ADUs or certain types of ADUs. And I'll give you an example. This is a long time ago, but my first apartment out of college was, the apartment was the first floor of a 1,400 square foot, 2-bedroom, 2-story house. The owner was in her 80s and lived upstairs, which she had turned into an apartment. I helped with yard chores. I got an affordable apartment. She got extra income. It was great for both of us. It worked out very well. When we built our current home in Beaver Creek, we designed it with density in mind. So it's a 2,500 square foot home, but it has a walkout basement. So we have 5 bedrooms in 2,500 square feet. The first floor has a master bedroom, so we can live on that and age in it without using the stairs at all. The basement we set up, it could be a separate apartment, and we've had families stay there for months at a time. 2 of the first floor bedrooms are joined by a Jack and Jill bathroom, and we designed it so it could be converted into an in-law apartment if my father-in-law ever needed to move in with us. The stairs to the basement, we made a little wider, so if we needed a stair lift chair, we could put it in. And all of our doors have handles, the lever handles instead of knobs. So even when you're building a new home, you can think about what is the density in your current home, and is there a way to increase density? Because it may be creating new homes. We want to think about apartment, single family homes in density, but even within current homes, we can put more people in current homes and increase density. Now, here's an interesting question. Do we hate new housing? And I would contend that in a way we do. These headlines show opposition to housing, some of which St. Mary was involved with. In fact, I heard a large market rate developer, this is a market rate developer, not affordable housing, say that regardless of the type of housing, if a new housing project goes on a ballot for the community to vote on, it is almost always voted down. It doesn't matter if it's high-priced single-family homes, senior condos, and affordable high-rise. People tend to think the worst when it comes to new housing. They think it will create traffic jams, ruin the environment, it's going to crowd our schools, it will have a negative impact on the community. And in my experience, those fears are rarely based in fact. But our attitude tends to be, once we have our housing, we don't want others to move in close to us. I've seen this in my own neighborhood. We saw this in Yellow Springs recently. Yellow Springs desperately needs new housing. And the housing got pushed out and they weren't willing to put in it. And this was high-end single family homes. So they know they have a problem, but they still didn't have the political and emotional will to move forward with it. This is especially true for rental housing, even though there's a great need for it. And while what we have to realize is not everyone wants to be a homeowner. Many communities don't want rental housing because they believe it's inferior. Now, this is kind of a Midwest view because, as Ryan said, we have lots of land. So in places where housing prices are very high and land is limited, such as San Francisco, most people assume they will rent for their entire lives. The average home price in San Francisco is 1.3 million and out of reach for most people. So 62% of people in San Francisco rent. There's no stigma to renting in San Francisco. And you can see from these tables that some US cities have home ownership levels below 30%. The lowest home ownership rates tend to be in cities that are the most expensive to live in. But even in cities with the greatest housing shortages, there is often pushback when new housing units are proposed. This is a really interesting study, especially if you're kind of a data geek like I am. There's some research that shows that English-speaking countries are worse at increasing housing supply compared to other developed nations. So what you're seeing here in red are the English-speaking countries. Related to that, English-speaking countries tend to have more negative views about living in apartments or having them built nearby. And I've included a link to the Financial Times article that this came from, and we'll share the slides with you so you can read it. The article has some hypotheses regarding why this is the case, and it's a very interesting kind of data point and study. But I want to share with you one of the most restrictive density rules in the country, and it applies to an entire state. In 1970, the state of Vermont passed Act 250. The law created a 9-district review process for all large-scale development projects, and their goal was to protect the environment, community life, and the aesthetic character of the state. So the commission has the power to issue or deny real estate developers for any project that encompasses more than 10 acres or even more than an acre for towns that don't have permanent zoning or subdivision bylaws. Here's the kicker. The law also applies to any development with more than 10 housing units. So in Vermont, 10 housing units is considered very dense. So what's the impact? Well, the Vermont Commissioner of Housing and Community Development said, we really have a system where one neighbor or a couple people can say, no, I just don't like that apartment building next to me, and stop it. So this has been going on since 1970. So what is this aesthetic character of Vermont they're trying to protect? I would say that what they're trying to protect is homelessness. Vermont ranks 3rd per capita in the United States among all states for homelessness. They need 30,000 new homes, yet what drives the homelessness is their self-imposed housing density rule. This is in a lot of areas that need housing. They won't change their, if Vermont changed that density rule, there would be developers who would come in and build housing immediately. So what can you do as you're looking at your community? Housing density is one of the few factors your community controls. And it's especially important to look as you're looking at older people in an age-friendly community. So here's a few things you can do. First, review your zoning policy's density rules and know what it is. Change the zoning to make it easier to build denser areas. In many areas, you need a planned unit development approval, which can be very, very cumbersome and cost a lot of money. So you can change zoning to say, hey, for multifamily, if you're building up to X number of units, you can build that without any other approval. When a new development's going in, ask questions about how you could gently increase the density. Could you put in townhomes, or could you put in some apartments in addition to single family homes? And I would say one of the most important things is talk with people in your community who prefer to rent, especially younger people and older people, and give renters a voice so that the community begins to realize that they know people who prefer to rent. There are people in your family that prefer to rent. Maybe you prefer to rent. They need a voice too as part of a community. So housing density is really one of your most important tools for an age-friendly community. Here's my contact information in case you'd like to get in touch. And I'm glad to answer any questions that you might have.